In unserer Familie ist viel geredet worden von Fritz.
Und dann habe ich mal am Thies gesagt, glaubst du mal, kommt einer mit einem Bart und sagt, ich bin der Fritz.
Ich habe gesagt, nein. Jetzt ist er seit dann 15. 15. Und wenn ich sage, wenn er 55 das gesagt hat, dann sind wir 2 Jahre geheiratet gewesen. Wäre er 40 Jahre nichts mehr gehört haben.
Danach hat man gesagt, er war halt einfach ein risikofreudiger Mensch gewesen, oder? Er hat nichts geschochen und dann hat man gedacht, ist er vielleicht an einem anderen Ort wieder in ein Ereignis hineingerannt, das ihm vielleicht das Leben gekostet hat.
Seemed like he was. I see in the pictures now he wasn't that big a person, but to us, he was like a Superman. He did things that nobody else could do.
He wanted to strike it rich in gold. He really was going to. All his guiding and taking people was just to get enough money so that he could go and search for gold. He had gold fever.
He'd go walking along a stream like this and he'd look down and he'd pick up a rock like this one that had quartz in it. He'd go, oh, might have gold. And he'd hold the rock in his hand and he'd bring out his rock hammer and he'd pop it so that it would pop open. And he'd look for gold.
There's a lot of things about him I didn't know. But some of the stories he told me and other people, he wasn't the kind of guy that made up stories.
Da ist, glaube ich, der Stein, wo der Fritz Blumer am Ort seinen Namen eingeritzt hat, wo er oben mit der Rinderhirte war. Da sind jetzt natürlich ein Haufen Namen. Und da steht Fritz Blumer, Dörfli, da gewesen im Jahr 1912. 23 Kälber, 25 Rinder, 2 Zeitkühe, 3 Ziegen und ein Hund. Weißt du, mein Vater wollte auch gehen, wo die 2 gegangen sind. Und dann hat der Großvater und die Großmutter gesagt, ja nein, von 3 Knaben muss schon einer daheim sein. Man weiß ja nie, was passiert. Und dann wollten wir schon noch einen daheim. Und der Vater war sehnlichst gerne auch von Amerika durch. Damals Die nach Amerika sind die allermeisten als Melcher gegangen, auf Amerika. Meist haben sie schon jemanden gekannt, weil eine Generation voran schon Leute durch sind. Aber sie haben niemanden gekannt. Und dann hat der Vater erzählt, die seien am Morgen früh Geiss melken. Er, der Vater meine. Und voraus ist der Mattis gegangen und dann der Fritz, und jeder mit einer Guffere. Und die sind nach Amerika und er hinten drin. Mit dem Geissmilchkessel. Und so sind sie über das Feuerli runter, in Geissgade runter, und dann die zwei auf den Bahnhof hindern. Wo sie dort beim Feuerli-Haus vorbei sind und so auf der Vor oben, sind das Kammerfenster aufgegangen und davor das, haben rausgerufen, lebt wohl, mit einer ganz verklärten Stimme eigentlich. Das ist dem Vater geblieben. Und dort hat er eigentlich den Fritz das letzte Mal gesehen.
A lot of the young men came as single men through the years. And there were people in town. Ernie Tierstein had a tavern downtown, and he would take a lot of these young single Swiss guys in and provide them with room and board and help them make connection with a farmer so they could work as a hired hand on the farm or perhaps a factory job or something to help them get started. So the Swiss immigrants that had been here for a time would sponsor someone to come.
In dem Leben von meinem Großvater mit der Großmutter und so hat die zwei Söhne, die nach Amerika ausgewandert sind, dann 1913 eine grosse Rolle gespielt. Und dann haben die vom älteren Sohn, vom Mattis, normale Berichte bekommen, auch die Geschwister, hauptsächlich die zwei Schwester Marie. Und der Vater war dann auch noch daheim. Und vom Fritz, vom Fridolin Blumer, dem zweiten Sohn, der nach Amerika ist, haben die von einem 15 eigentlich nichts mehr gehört.
Wenn er jetzt gestorben wäre, und man, also das ist ja sicher überall, wenn jemand gestorben ist und man hat den Beweis, dass er gestorben ist, dann gibt es einmal eine innere Ruhe. Und so gibt es nie eine.
Fritz Bloomer, his brother Matthias, and his friend Koby, Jacob Marty, arrive on Ellis Island on March 23, 1913. Fritz and his brother Matthias are both employed at a different farm in Monticello, which is a community in the vicinity of New Glarus. Dear Sister, I've started working in America in good health. I've already spent 2 months at this place. The work suits me quite well. It's always been my wish to have enough work on the field and with the cattle. I don't have to work as a day laborer anymore. I haven't felt homesick at all. Well, I quite like to go out with my buddies on Saturdays and Sundays, but I can cope with that all right. We own about 30 cows and oxen, 6 horses, 6 old pigs, and 28 piglets, over 100 hens, and a few geese and turkeys, a dog, and a couple of cats. On April 28th, I've received 2 letters, one from home and one from Koby. I felt and still feel very happy every time I read them. I know them almost by heart. Koby wrote a very beautiful letter to me. I know absolutely nothing about my brother because we're separated from each other by about 12 miles. That corresponds to about 21 kilometers. I have a very good employment. I earn about $30 a month, and the food that I receive is comparable to what we usually eat at a feast. I'll stay for 8 months, because during wintertime, he doesn't need a farmhand. You would also earn more here. A maidservant earns about $25 to $30 or even $35 a month. Maidservants are heavily in demand here. The passage by ship was all right. I used to dance every day. There were also a lot of ladies on the ship. The trip on land was much less agreeable. Has my brother written to you? I'll soon visit him, but it's pretty far. I'd like to end this letter. I don't have a beautiful hand. You'll have to spell it all out. I'm in good health and hope that you and all my relatives are equally well. I send my regards to you, the parents and siblings, the grandmother, all the relatives, and to everyone that asks about me. Well, goodbye, and live peacefully and quietly in our homeland. This wish-wash is from your brother, F.B. Please write to me soon. After 2 years, Fritz moves on to St. Louis.
There were undoubtedly some Swiss people that settled in St. Louis itself, but there was no big movement from this area down there that I'm aware of. Must have been an individual thing where he was looking for adventure, something new, something different.
Einmal hat wollte in die Städtli. In Wels weiss ich nicht. Und dann hat einen auch gehabt, als Fuhrwerk, 2 Ross. Und der hat, glaube ich, Milch geladen, Milchkanten. Also so ist es jetzt mir noch. Und dann hat der Fritz auch gehabt und gefragt, ob er mitfahren darf. Und dann, wo der auf dem Trittbrett oben war, bevor er abgehockt ist, hat der Geisel genommen, der Wurm, und hat über die Ross hineingeschlagen an den Schranz, und der geht zwischen den Rossenbogen runter und ist gehangen. Und da sind die Ross durchgebrannt. Und der hat einen schauderhaften Aufhall gehabt. Schauderhaft, der ganze Rücken war geschürft. Und dann dort hätte er lang im Spital sein.
St. Louis, June 8th, 1915. Dear brother, I got rid of the last bandage yesterday, and since I'm fed up with St. Louis, I'm departing tonight. If you happen to write home, please send them my regards and ask if they have received my letters and cards. I'm not healthy enough to work on a farm again, and I don't want to stay in St. Louis. This is why I'm departing. I'll write again to you, but that could take quite a while. I would have returned now, but what could I do? Regards, your brother. Despite his announcement that he would depart the same evening, Fritz stays in St. Louis. About 4 months later, he writes a postcard to his younger brother Johann in Switzerland.
26. November, lieber Bruder, schon 9 Monate warte ich auf einen Brief oder Karte von euch, aber nichts erscheint. Ich habe von Vinzenz einen Brief erhalten und von Koby. Bin jetzt gesund wie ein Fisch, hoffe auch dasselbe von euch allen. Schreibe jetzt nicht mehr. Was soll ich denn schreiben und doch nicht Antwort erhalten? Nun bleibt gesund und lebt alle wohl. Die besten Grüße von FB.
Engi, January 29th, 1916. Dear brother, every day now we're expecting a short letter from you and Fritz. Hopefully, it'll arrive soon. We're all in good health and hope that the same applies to you both. Where is Fritz right now? Is he still in St. Louis? We've received a card for Christmas, but there was no address on it. Send us a card soon, will you? Well, goodbye. Everyone sends their regards. Your sister, Marie.
Monticello, 30. Mai 1916, liebe Schwester. Habe deine Karte erhalten und den Brief von Anneli für den Fritz. Die Mutter soll schreiben, wenn ihr das erhalten habt, was ich geschickt habe. Den Brief will ich dem Fritz zukommen lassen. Seit Dezember hat er mir nicht mehr geschrieben. Weiß die Adresse nicht. Nebst Gruß schließt M. Blumer.
Matthias remains on the farm in Wisconsin and returns to Engi 6 years later without any news from his brother Fritz.
Das hat mich nachher immer beschäftigt. Ich habe immer gedacht, ist das möglich? Lebt ich der noch oder lebt er nicht mehr? Gell? Das hat mich nie eigentlich losgelassen. Und es war ja auch so, dass nachher jedes Jahr, an jedem Fest, wo die Familie zusammen gesessen ist, hat man wieder noch von dem Fritz geredet.
Und dieser Mauer da oben hat sie gleich ausgesehen wie dort hinten. Da haben wir immer drinnen ausgespielt und das ist jetzt ein Ballengarten.
Da ist die Großmutter nicht so zufrieden.
Welche Großmutter?
Weißt, die haben schon immer erzählt, der fritzige Abenteurer gesehen, einfach, bei dem hat immer etwas laufen, nicht? Und die Kinder sind allwegs innen aufgehangen, wenn er nur gesehen war, weißt du, so an den Lebten und sich mit den Kindern abgegeben hat.
Gut, ich bin hier aufgewachsen, hier oben im oberen Teil des Hauses, gegen die Straße raus. Ich war viel bei Matthias unten, weil ich ihm geholfen Geiss milchen, ich habe ihm geholfen die Hühner füttern. Immer wenn wir hier unten unter dem Haus geguckt sind, am Abend nach dem Geisshirten, nach dem Milchen, sind wir auf das Bänkchen hingeguckt, hat er zuerst das Pfeifchen angezündet, hat es gestopft, angezündet, nicht angefangen zu erzählen, immer von Amerika. Und eben viel hat er also von seinem Bruder Fritz erzählt. Es ist fast keine Zusammenkunft vergangen, ohne dass er vom Bruder Fritz erzählt hat. Wie das viel der Wiffer war als er viel mehr gewusst hat von dort auch, als er gerne mit ihm zusammen war, der ihm alles gezeigt. Und irgendwie hat er gewusst, der Fritz muss es noch geben. Aber er hat immer gesagt, wenn ich nur wüsste, wo der Fritz wäre. Wenn ich nur wüsste, wo der Fritz wäre. Ihm ist der Dicke mal eine Tränen runtergelaufen, wenn er von Fritz erzählt hat. Und ich habe mich dann gefragt, warum auch, wenn man von jemand anderem erzählt, dass man den Brühl dabei, ich habe das nicht begriffen, noch als ganz kleiner Bub.
31 Grad haben wir gehabt, und das haben wir ja bei uns nicht so oft gehabt. Ich hatte grossen Steh vor Wäsche und bin zum Haus raus und wollte die Wäsche abnehmen.
Also eben, ich war im Putzen in der Schule und dann hat die Mutter gemeint schreiben und sagt, du, da ist Besuch von Amerika. Und dann bin ich da und da sind da eben 3 in der Gemeindekanzlei gesessen mit dem Schorsch Höfte und haben mir da Grüezi gesagt, ich habe es ja natürlich nicht verstanden.
Haben sie ein Plastiktäschchen bei sich mit der Foto drin, wo er vor einer Mine steht.
Einmal der Fritz ist heimgekommen am Abend und danach habe ich zu ihm gesagt, jetzt musst du aber absitzen. Das glaubst ja du nicht, was ich jetzt heute erlebt habe. Jetzt kommen die Amerikaner und sagen, sie seien Kind von dem Fritz Blumer, der verschollen ist.
Und da ist ein Zettel auf dem Küchentisch. Die Mutter hat einen Zettel geschrieben. Ich soll, wenn ich nach der Sitzung soll mich duschen, parat machen und an der Stall legen und ins Hüftis raufkommen. Das ist wichtig.
Und dann sind die alle gekommen am Abend. Der Hans, die Heidi, alle sind am Abend ins Hüftis gekommen. Und dann ist das also, die etwas können reden, haben geredet und verstanden und dann weitergegeben an andere. Wir sind die ganze Nacht wach im Bett. Wir konnten nicht schlafen. Das Warum und Wieso, das haben wir uns 100-mal gefragt. Als das so gegangen ist, dass der nichts mehr hören lassen hat. Sie haben ja nie gewusst, dass er nicht Koby heisst. Nicht? Sie haben ja, Mari hat gesagt, sie haben immer gedacht, so wie mir heisst kein Mensch.
Es hätte schon Koby gestanden. Der Name Jack Koby. Er hatte 2 Kollegen, die Koby geheißen haben. Ja. Das war der Schlichter, der Alte. Und vom Hoster Jack, der Großvater. Der hat Jacques geheißen. Jack, bei uns ist ein Jakob, ein Bursch, der Jakob getauft wurde, ist ein Jack, hat man gesagt. Oder ein Koby. Also, das ist Jack. Das ist Englisch, ein kleines Jack.
Sometimes they would take a town and use it for their name. I mean, a name of a town, and they would say that was their last name, a country. You know, from the country they were from, they would pick a new name, just as if they were reborn or something.
I think he just took that name because Bloomer in those days referred to women's underpants. And it was a nickname for bloomers, you know, they called them bloomers. And so maybe somebody gave him a bad time about that. Maybe that, and he came over with Jacoby Marty, so we thought Jacoby, you know, Jacoby. That's how we thought he got the name.
You know, if you think about it, Jack Koby's kind of a catchy name.
Fritz Bloomer has not died, but he has changed his name and has moved on to Alaska. Four years after Fritz has sent his last card home, he reappears for the first time under his new name in the personnel records of the Alaska Juneau gold mine.
We're at the HA mine, and this is right up the hill from Juneau, the city of Juneau, and my grandfather worked in this mine. And when he was young, before he was married, he actually stayed in a boarding house. And right over in that direction, there were housing for the miners. And when I was young, the building was still here. It was a huge building, 3-story building. Then it was real easy for the miners to get to work, and they rode to work in these mine cars. And there were tracks, and they were like small trains, and they ran into the mine.
When he was first employed in the gold mine, Fritz Bloomer stated the following particulars. Name, Jacques Vincent Koby, age 33. Parents, Jack and Elsbeth Koby, 64 and 61 years old. Address, Bürglen, Canton of Uri in Switzerland. Children, Dorothy Koby, 9 years old. Wife, deceased.
The other interesting thing on this certificate of employment is that they say that his family and relatives are from Bergland, Uri, Switzerland, which we know wasn't the truth, because since he was from Engi, you know, that I think a lot of this information, he just put down whatever he felt like he wanted to on it. So, and I think the dates, his parents' age, they're totally wrong also. So it's kind of interesting.
In reality, Fritz is only 26 years of age. He declares his father 9 and his mother even 12 years older than they really are. Without further ado, he chooses as his hometown the place of birth of the Swiss national hero William Tell. Further, he mentions a 9-year-old daughter which, following the true events, would have been born in Switzerland when Fritz was only 17 years old. He also mentions a deceased wife.
The only reason why you listed people was if you died, the death benefits would go to these people. So if you read this, it says beneficiaries. So in other words, if he dies, they would get the money. So he's listed who he wants to have given the money. These are the people. Plus, I mean, he could have said he had, because he'd get more pay based upon if you have children.
The other thing I thought was interesting is how many times he's changed his name, because he's calling himself Jacques in 1919. He hasn't changed it to Jack yet. So
Fritz works only temporarily for the Alaska Juneau gold mine. With every new employment, he confuses his age and the age of his parents. He even mentions wrong particulars within the false statements already made. For instance, his father ages only 3 years within a time span of 7 years. His mother ages only 4 years, and he himself only 3 years within the same time span. 1926 is the last year that he mentions a daughter. Fritz is first employed by the gold mine as a miner until in June 1922 he is hired for the first time as a so-called bulldozer.
Well, eventually the mining went underground, and that's where the AJ became famous. You know, originally when they started mining, they were only mining 100 tons a day, but eventually they mined 13,000 tons a day underground, and it was on a very massive scale that they would be mining. So what they would do is they excavated a tunnel way at depth underneath the ore body, and they began what we call driving raises, which are vertical like shafts going up into the ore body, and they would then have little small tunnels going off through the ore body, and these little tunnels, they would put as much as 750 cases of dynamite in there, and they would have a fuse. They'd light it off, everybody get out of the mine, and it would literally shake the town, and they could break as much as 500,000 tons in one blast. Once they did that, some of these boulders were, as big as houses, so they would draw them down through these shafts to what we call a bulldoze chamber. A bulldoze chamber was where a man would basically, his job was to make sure that the rock was small enough, the gold-bearing rock, that it could fit through these steel I-beams that were set 18 inches apart. So a bulldozer's job was to keep that flow of ore going and to break up anything that was really large. And he might have to drill it and put an explosive in it if it was really big, or he could hammer it with a jackhammer to break it up. And his job was to keep it going down through these grates. Well, these grates were over what we call an oreway, and that oreway could be 300 feet down to the main haulage level. And if a bulldozer slipped, he would be killed.
In his spare time, Fritz explores the environment, probably in search of gold.
About 70 years ago, in 1867, Secretary of State William H. Seward bought Alaska.
In 1927, Koby, now 34 years of age, meets a Jesuit priest and professor of geology called Father Bernard Rosencrantz Hubbard.
And Alaska became known as Seward's Folly. But let us see if these citizens were right or wrong in their conclusions. Today, there is no man better qualified to give you a true picture of Alaska than Father Bernard Hubbard, known as the Glacier Priest, a Jesuit explorer who has spent over 10 years in our great Northern Territory.
10 years ago, when I first began with my loyal young college men and faithful dogs, annual trips of scientific exploration to the north, I thought that Alaska was just a worthless knob of land on top of America, where Eskimos lived in igloos amid desolations of snow and ice. I was certainly surprised to find that it was anything but this. Popular notions of Alaska are for the most part all wrong. It is the least understood of any United States territory.
Hubbard looks for a guide for one of his expeditions, the first-time crossing of the Juneau Icefield. The glacier priest is looking for someone to explore glaciers with him, Jack. I'm not going hunting with any parson professor, Captain Strong. They're no good in the woods. At last, however, Koby consented reluctantly to accompany Father Hubbard. After several weeks of climbing and training, they set out with a boy and 3 packs of dogs.
Well, Hubbard thought that this crossing would take about 36 hours, and it took about twice that long. Part of the problem was that without maps, they were misjudging where they were a number of times, and they spent a lot of effort backtracking. And I think Hubbard said 67 hours was the total. Koby was the one who knew where the landmarks were. He was really the only one in the party who would have had the experience to know, to help them figure out where they were. Hubbard really wanted that Taku glacier element as part of his story. He wanted to cross that glacier that everyone said couldn't be crossed.
Even the Indians shun it, Father. They call it the spirit's home and say no man can cross it and live. Then we'll cross it and puncture superstition.
The source area, the Mendenhall, is fairly short, on the order of 10 kilometers up there. So it doesn't have that large of accumulation area. Again, here's the Mendenhall. The Taku, by contrast, flows from snow. Some of the snow accumulates as far as 40, 50 kilometers to the north, up toward the Canadian border. So it accumulates up here at elevations of near 8,000 feet and eventually flows all the way down to tidewater. Even to this day, there is a lot of activity at the terminus of the Taku Glacier.
In fact, I could read the whole thing if you want. Well, it all happened more quickly than it takes to tell. Jack, standing between the packed snow mass and the edge of the cliff and touching both, laid the point of his ice pick against the snow. Without warning, the rotted snow broke off high up in the rock fissure, and tons of it came straight at Jack. Both Snow and Jack seemed to leap out together, and with sickening helplessness, I saw him disappear over the edge. But a clash of spikes on rock, and peering over, there I beheld Jack, several feet below on the other side of the fissure, with both feet on a little projecting rock only a few inches wide, the only spot in the whole vicinity that could have saved him. One of the things that was commonly done at that time was explorers would go on their journeys, and then they would return and tell their story to lecture audiences, try to sell pictures to the newspapers, stories, articles to the newspapers, and they would make money that way to fund their next trip. And it was a cycle that went on, and Hubbard did the same thing. He would go and lecture to try to raise money, and he would try to sell photographs and get his name out.
Hubbard is cited in a journal article on the Juneau Icefield expedition. He said that he would walk to the North Pole with Jack Koby. I consider him one of the finest and bravest men I ever met. Juneau cannot be grateful enough to men of the type of Captain Strong and Jack Koby.
This is a story that Uncle Jack told me about Ines, and that what he had said was when she was living in Wisconsin with her family, when her parents died, she couldn't inherit anything. That because she was unmarried, she wasn't going to get this inheritance. So she just said, she told her family, I'm going to Alaska. If you don't have, better opinions or more respect for me than that, it's just saying that my value, because I'm not married, I don't have the same value as somebody else in my family that is married, then I will go to Alaska and live up there.
She did go to New York to be on the stage. She danced and she sang. And then she decided she was either going to go to South America or Alaska. And she flipped a coin and came out Alaska, so she went to Alaska.
She'd met my grandfather. What he was doing in the summertime to make money was he put wheels on his dog sled, and he would charge the tourists to ride in the dog sled. And he would take the dogs and he'd take them around the city of Juneau. You know how the Juneau is built on a hill, so he'd take them up all the hills and down the hills on this dog sled. And I think she is supposed to have met him, when he was doing that. And she just thought that he was really unique and different and just the kind of person she was looking for.
On September 29th, 1928, Jack Koby is married to Ines Gies, who originates from Prussia. Jack is 35 and his bride 34 when they get married. Ines has grown up in a wealthy family. As a daughter of Prussian immigrants, she was raised as a bilingual. She studied philosophy in Milwaukee while her future husband was still milking cows in Wisconsin.
The story I heard, and I'd actually heard this from my grandfather when I was little, was that the rocks came down and actually hit him, hit him in the legs. And he had gotten knocked down into this grid work. And as he went down, he was working with another guy, and he grabbed a hold of that guy's legs because it was all that he could do was hang on. And the dirt, the rock made him all black, and he looked really scary. Well, he, was pretty bloody from getting cut up, and the guy thought he was dead and was a ghost or something and hanging on to him. But as the guy was running away, because my grandfather had a compound fracture in his leg, the guy actually pulled him to safety because my grandfather just hung on to him really tight.
He was in the rock crusher, and he held on. Well, he had been a gymnast, so he could hold on to some bar there, and all these rocks bounced off him, and he had a lot of broken bones.
He fell down the shaft in the mine over in Juneau, but killed himself. Slipped and fell. Went down through the shaft. He hit the bottom of the mine.
So these guys that were what they call bulldozing some of the rocks wouldn't go through. So they'd put some high percentage power on it without bound to drill, and it would bust the rock. But anyway, Jack fell through this damn thing, and he held underneath while the rock was raining down and so on.
He was working with, I hate to use the word Irish, but anyway, some group like that from the old country, immigrants, and they believed in ghosts and spirits, and the whole goddamn mine roof came down, and just shut their view off from Jack.
They hauled him in the back of a truck up to the hospital, and they said he wouldn't last the night, so they just put him on a cot in the hallway. And by the time my mother got over there, his clothes were all in rags and mud, and my mother was really mad, and they said, well, no sense in putting him in a bed because he's going to die. And she said, I'm going to go down and get the U.S. Marshal, and if he isn't in a bed and cleaned up. When I come back, I'm going to have everybody arrested. And that's when they cleaned him up and put him in bed, and he survived.
Rocks were hanging in the stope that's up above, and the injured was trying to locate a place to put a blast, so he's going to try to break the rock up so it'll come flowing down. And in the meantime, a rock came down, striking him on the leg below the knee. So in other words, he was out over the grizzly. He probably did have his rope on because he probably would have gone down, and it would have killed him. The rock was hanging in the stope. He was looking up to see if he could get it down with a blasting stick, which means he had dynamite attached to a long stick, which is typical. You'd shove it up there in between the cracks of the rocks. You'd try between the rocks, and then you'd have a fuse on the end and light it. And he says, when a rock came down, hitting him on the right knee and bruising his leg from the knee to the ankle. So it broke his leg, but it doesn't say he fell.
Yeah, no, he had a lot of experiences. And an unusual man. He traveled unusual distances afoot, you know. That's what Paul Garceau up there says, I didn't know he was a man, I thought he was a legend.
He climbed mountains for the government and put markers on top, because a lot of the mountains in Alaska had never been climbed by anybody.
Jack Koby and his wife moved to the Taku River, which is about 80 kilometers from Juneau, close to the Canadian border.
To get the homestead rights, you had to grow certain vegetables and you had to have animals, you know, that were certain things. The government said, if we're going to give you this land, you have to, you know, make the land produce something.
Their first daughter, Elsbeth Louise, is born in December 1929. On October 14, 1931, their second daughter, Mary Kadoof, is born. The Koby family is the first Caucasian family to live in the Taku Valley all year round.
He wanted to have that farm, that beaver farm, which was something different, unique, you know. I mean, he didn't want to do the same thing that everybody else did. I mean,
Right.
Everybody else just kind of lived in Juneau and worked. You know, it was like the challenge of having a really nice place to live with a unique, you know, and he liked traveling on the river. He liked doing stuff himself, you know, and there was nobody up here really to take care of you. You had to take care of yourself. He had captured a couple beaver, you know, from other areas. And what beaver, you know, they have a little community. And so he'd gotten a pair of beaver and he had designed this kind of a clamshell trap for them so that he could catch them alive and transport them to his farming area. And he had, you know, a little area set up where they could live. And then what he would do as they bred, then he'd get two, like a female and a male.
There was a lot of money in beaver furs at that time. And so he got permission. It took him a long time to get permission to import blue beaver from Siberia. And he stocked a pond, he lined it with some kind of mesh. And he stocked that pond with beaver, and then they multiplied. And then just as they were about ready to harvest the beaver skins, the money dropped out of the beaver market, and they didn't get any money for them. So that's when they left.
You know, my mom was, she was born, Aunt Mary was born, and Uncle Jack was on the way. And it would be a lot to have 3 kids up Taku, you know, trying to raise them and take care of them. and there just wasn't there wasn't any value. He couldn't make money up there anymore. So he decided, okay, I can't make money here. I'm going to move on and try something different.
Jack works again as a bulldozer for the Juneau gold mine. The particulars about him, Inez, and the children now correspond to reality. In November 1933, Koby states that his father has died. Of course, he could only speculate whether or not his parents were still alive at that time. 18 years have already passed since he broke ties with his home country. As a matter of fact, Jack's father, Fritz Bloomer, dies a year later in Engi on June 7, 1934. At the time of his death, he was 68 years old. He dies just 1 month before Jack and Ina's third child, John Fridolin, is born. The naming of his children apparently commemorates his family back in Switzerland. Elsbeth was named after Jack's mother, Mary Kadoof, after his sister Marie, and his mother's maiden name, Kadoof. And John Fridolin was named after his brother Johann and his father, Fridolin.
We're on Basin Road, and it runs from Juneau to the AJ mine. And it's this is the house where my grandfather, Jack Koby, lived with my mother, Elsbeth, and my Aunt Mary, my Uncle Jack. And they lived in here in the 30s, the early 30s. The house is quite a bit different than it was at the time. It was a lot smaller.
And then he would also go out prospecting and looking for gold. And, he was always gone, it seemed like. He would, come back and there'd be a big, happy reunion. And he'd be there for a while, and then pretty soon he was gone again. And I remember his backpack. And they weren't made like the aluminum ones, lightweight. They were made out of big wood, and canvas. And they were heavy.
We're going to go to Lucky Strike Mine, which is the mining claim of Jack Koby.
For bears. Hopefully not for bears. Hopefully it's just for looks for the rest of the trip.
It's a shotgun.
It's a shotgun.
We're gonna go up the river, along the river till we hit the river trail. Then we're gonna follow the river trail across the meadows, up to the cottonwoods, through the cottonwoods up into the big timber, and we're gonna follow the river trail along the river up until we hit the Lucky Strike Trail, and then we'll detour uphill. See, it's jumping around. It says it's poor GPS coverage. Now it says 090. 147, 49, north. So as you go north, the numbers get smaller or bigger?
No, bigger. Smaller.
Smaller. So then we do need to keep going that way.
Hiking for hours and hours with people who are familiar with the place doesn't lead to any results. In the last 70 years, nature has wiped out all the traces of Jack Koby's gold mine. It remains undiscovered.
I remember we had a cabin, and then we had a tent where the workers stayed. He had 2 workers that worked in the mine. And it was a house, you know, it just had the bare wood and had rafters up on the top. And they had a tractor, and then they would go up to the mine and stay there all day working it.
It was quite a setup. Interesting. Pick up the rocks they had and look in there and it get cold. Then they put mercury in it. It would go through it and the mercury would stick to the gold. And that's how they got the gold. They saved it. Even the small little stuff in there would stick to that where they painted the mercury. It's pretty interesting, that kind of work, but a little bit no good for me.
It was nice. We liked it up there. We had dogs, and it was nice. Carefree. But there were no other children. There was nobody else lived there but us and the 2 guys that worked in the mine. And the Moricks lived in a mine further down. And they used to always tell us, you know, they were going to take us to see some other kids. And we hadn't seen any other kids in a long, long time. And so we thought he was kidding, because they called baby goats kids. And we said, he's probably going to take us to see goats. And pretty soon we went down there one day. And we hadn't been around other kids for so long that we were really bashful and shy. But they had a big family, and they had a lot of kids, and they played, and they'd jump rope and hide and seek and all the things kids do. But we were so backward that we couldn't play with them, you know, until it was just about time to go home. And then we were having so much fun, and we had to turn around and go because the tide had changed. And then we didn't see them again until they built Pelican. They built a school there.
When they got together and started the school down here, then of course there were all of his brothers and sisters and the Koby kids, and so they had enough to make a school, you know.
The village was originally founded by a Finnish fishmonger. He was looking for a place close enough to the fishing grounds where he could build a cold storage plant. The village was named after his boat, the Pelican.
The guy was trying to find families to move in so he could start a town, and there was the water was really good, a real nice water, like a creek that ran through Pelican that they could generate power with. So he figured if he could get a water generator to generate electricity, they could run a coal storage plant there. And if he had families, that would attract more people to move there. They'd have more workers. And so my grandfather said, yes, I have a wife and 3 kids. You know, I could move them out here. We could live in here. You could have your school. And my grandfather could still go up Lisiansky and do his gold mine. And then on off seasons, he could actually work at the coal storage, would be another thing he could do, you know.
In order to build in this location, they brought the mining equipment here on their floats, on their barges, and came here and used blasting equipment and all the things that miners use in this area to level this area out. And a school was formed in order to provide education for the children of Jack Koby and the children of Yelmer and Eliza Mork. So behind me in the background is the school building where children went to school in the 1940s.
Yeah, one room, but they took turns teaching. Well, see, I would have been in the 3rd grade. So, and I think I was the only one in the 3rd grade. And maybe Raymond Mork was the same age as me. I just don't remember. But Bill was the oldest one.
I can't remember anymore. I'm getting too old, I guess.
Not yet.
Not yet.
By the time World War II broke out, and we had backers that paid to have them working in the mine, and they lost interest in gold, and they were looking for other ore, I guess, so they just dropped out. And by that time they had built Pelican, so my dad went down there. He went to work for the coal storage, I think, or the people that were building over there. And eventually he bought a boat and went fishing. I don't think he liked working for other people. He wanted to work for himself. And so that's probably why he bought a boat. He was very independent.
The power trolling is dragging lines through the water for salmon. And it's called power trolling because you're using hydraulic power to lower the lines down and to pull the lines back up. And it's called trolling because it's so slow. We're only going 3 miles an hour, 2 or 3 miles an hour. And we're dragging little lures in the water, trying to get the fish's attention. That's how it goes behind this flasher. You can see it spins in the water. Jack Koby definitely used this. This has not changed at all. This is one of the original spoons they used to use. I don't know how long they've had these, but probably since trolling was invented. They still work really well. We're dragging our gear at a certain depth along the ocean bottom, and in Jack Koby's days, they didn't know exactly where they were, and now we know with our charts and our GPSs exactly where we are. Back then, it was much more difficult. I think I have 16 hooks out, but I only have 1 fish today, so. It's a good thing. I mean, it's a good that we're still here and nothing has changed, and I think it's kind of like, it's an example of how you should manage your fisheries and always be mindful of, I mean, it feels good to catch a lot of fish, but I don't ever want to catch so many that I kill everything.
The school only went up to the 6th grade. And once you're out of the 6th grade, there's no more school. And my mother thought that we were getting too, uneducated, growing up uneducated. So she wanted to go to the States.
What my mom had told me is that her mother had cancer, and it was when she first started getting it, and she knew she was sick, and there was no doctor in Pelican. And so that she wanted to go to Juneau, to see a doctor here, and there weren't doctors good enough in Juneau, so she actually went to a doctor in Portland, Oregon, because it was like a bigger, better facilities to see a doctor.
In 1945, Inez and the children moved to Oregon.
They were living in Tillamook, Oregon at the time in the city, And it was just my mom and Ines. There was nobody else there at that time because she was pretty bad off, really sick. The day she died, my mom said she came home and she was laying on the couch. And my mom thought, oh, she's finally laying down. She looks so comfortable. And so my mom didn't wake her up or anything. She just kind of kept doing what she's doing. And then she realized how she was so quiet. Something was wrong. And she went over and looked at her and realized she was dead.
Jack Koby continues to work as a fisherman in Juneau and Pelican. He mainly lives on his boat. Jack's eldest daughter, Elsbeth, is married to George Baker in Juneau and has 5 children. His second daughter, Mary, is married to Joe DePello. She has 1 daughter and moves to California. John Friedeline is married in Juneau and has a son.
Also sie hat einfach nie aufgegeben. Sie hat immer gesagt, sie fühlt, als er lebt. Und sie hatte halt allerlei, sie hat zum Beispiel ein grosses Bild an der Wand gehabt. Und hat sie gesagt, sie hat es gehört, Klöpfeln in dem oben ganz deutlich gehört, Klöpfeln. Das sei für sie ein Zeichen, dass er sicher lebe. Es war furchtbar für sie. Wenn ich denke, es war schlimm, da hat aber auch das ganze Dorf ein bisschen mitgelitten mit ihr. Weil sie hat das einfach immer geglaubt und die anderen haben das vielleicht auch müssen sagen, Betty, das kann fast nicht wahr sein, gell? Es muss vielleicht etwas passiert sein, sonst hätte er sicher einmal wieder geschrieben. Es war schon nicht glaubwürdig für alle anderen Leute.
Jack Koby has already 2 grandchildren when his mother in Switzerland invokes a presumption of death in 1953.
Und dann ist das eine Weile gegangen, das Verschollenheitsverfahren. Und dann ist Bericht gekommen, dass ich die Jäger nicht gefunden. Und ist amtlich verschollen erklärt worden.
One year after she has invoked the presumption of death, Elsbeth Blumer Kaduf dies at the age of 84. Jack is 61 years old.
Yeah, what do you have to say, Grandy? You have anything to say to me?
I don't know what to say.
Just
To
say
who,
something.
to who am I talking to?
Nobody. You just.
I haven't got the teeth in.
Oh well, it's just. That's cruel. I'm just gonna see if this works or not. That's why I'm gonna try and get out.
Yeah. What kind of a rig is that?
It's made in Japan, but it's
That
good
looks like
to.
it's winding backwards, if you ask me.
No, it's not. It's riding forward. It comes off this wheel and it goes onto this wheel.
You know how to race the deer?
He was really gentle, and he didn't just gab and talk a lot, but when he said something, he meant it. I was really young, and he and I were kind of like constant companions when he was there, and he would, teach me. I was kind of maybe overly attached to him, so if he was out of my sight, I would just yell for him, and I remember one time he came around the corner and he said, if you want to find me, you listen, you use your ears, you use your eyes.
He was really a wonderful grandfather. It was really, really nice having him for a grandfather. He'd teach us how to garden. He loved gardening, and growing stuff, and he'd work the soil, and he'd actually get buckets of dirt, he'd be big, 5-gallon buckets of dirt from other old farm areas that were just abandoned in Juneau. He knew where all the old farms were, and they had really good soil. So he'd go out and he'd get a bunch of buckets, and then he'd dump them in our garden, and we'd work the dirt, make it better, and we'd bring like fish and starfish and stuff from the beach, the water, and to build up the soil, give it nutrients. And we were always growing stuff, and he would come in, from fishing, and he'd help us get the garden set up, and then every time he came back in from fishing, he would teach us what else to do next with the garden.
Well, he was very adventurous, and even when he came down, he took a trip to the desert. And he went to Las Vegas. He went all over. He'd take a bus and he'd go. He was very independent.
He had a rose tattoo on his arm, and we loved that when we were little kids. We were just like, we'd always spit on our finger and try to rub it off, thinking it would come off.
He liked kids. He could go into that personality and carry my children around, and of course bring them goodies. And they all knew him, and he could spend. He's the type of guy that he could spend 100% time with you, just like a kid, so that he could spend. He gave it full interest.
At the age of 61, Koby experiences yet another adventure.
He had this little schooner that sunk on him by Lemishire Island at a strong northerly.
And he said as the boat was going down, he grabbed his air. He didn't have much time because the water, the boat sinking, So he grabbed his rifle, and I can't remember what else. He grabbed it and he threw him on this air mattress, Then he carried the air mattress out. As the water came over the side of the boat, he just had to lay down on this air mattress and try to, paddle it to shore. And it was really bad weather.
The old boat wasn't up to it, Anyway, it sunk, and that was when he with a mattress, he swam ashore in Mud Bay, which was downwind from where he sunk,
He was wet, from being in the water, and he leaned against the rock, and his clothes actually started freezing to this rock.
So anyway, he survived that, but he survived a lot of things.
I can remember him telling us that story when I was a little kid, because I can still picture his, we'd go on his trolling boat with him, and you could see his air mattress in his bed. So, as far as I know, he fished, from the late 40s until his boat sunk in 1967. He was in California at the time, and he had a gas engine in the boat, and there was a leak in one of his tanks. And because it was wintertime, they had a heat lamp on the engine to keep it from freezing, and it exploded, and it blew a plank out of the boat. One of the planks that formed the side of the boat popped loose, and the water came in, and the boat sank at the harbor. My grandfather never did get another boat. There just wasn't any way for him to start over again with a new boat because it was just too expensive. I can remember it was early spring, it was March, and right after the New Year, my grandfather had gotten really sick. He had had emphysema, which he had really a hard time breathing. He just couldn't catch his breath. And it had been kind of a real cold, damp winter. And he had been at my folks' house because he was not well. And he'd gotten to where he was coughing, and he just couldn't catch his breath. So they went, my mom and dad took him to the hospital.
I think he kind of had, while he was at the hospital, really sick with, he had like a stroke, and then he couldn't speak very well. And he had false teeth. Remember when I told you the avalanche came down, and it was a rock avalanche, not a snow avalanche. That's what I was told. That's what he told me, and knocked his teeth out. So he had both upper and bottom. So they took his teeth, so he couldn't talk very well without his teeth. So he had a hard time communicating. But then, toward the end, he always just spoke English really clearly. If he had his teeth in, it was really clearly. And he switched back to Swiss, and he never went back to English. And so his last time, I don't know if that was days or weeks, Uncle Jack told me. He'd go to the hospital, he'd sit there. Uncle Jack lived in Pelican, but he flew into Juneau to be with his dad because he knew he was gravely ill. And that he switched back. And he'd say, Dad, you have to talk English, you know. I don't speak Swedish. And he just, that's what Uncle Jack told me. He switched before he died, totally back.
And I was in California, and I got leave. I had just started working in the post office. And so I got permission to go up there, but they told me that he was unconscious and to wait till he got a little better and then come up, and then he never got better.
Jack Koby, alias Fritz Bloomer, dies in 1969 at the age of 75.
Somebody gave my brother the papers where he came to this country, his citizenship papers, but they weren't supposed to give that out. But the guy was nice enough to make a copy for my brother, and that's how he found out where he was from, and they went back there. That's when they met your family.
My mom was a little nervous about going. It was a long ways, and she had never traveled that far. But Uncle Jack he had planned everything.
He just said at least he wanted to see Engi. He didn't think that he would see any relatives or even meet any family. He just wanted his eyes to see, and he wanted to stand on that soil where his dad had came from. So that was his goal, to just get there.
By the time John Fridolin, Elsbeth, and John's son Jack arrive in Engi, there's only one person alive who knew Fritz Bloomer personally, his younger brother Johan. He was only 16 years old when Fritz left Engi and never returned home.
Ja, ich denke, nur dem Vater muss ich das sagen, auch meinem Schwiegervater, oder? Das war sein Bruder. Und da sind wir mit dem Auto Film gefahren.
Aber er hat es nicht mehr recht gecheckt. Es war ja wie ein Schock.
Ich habe einer Freude dem Vater gesagt, du, weißt du, wer bin ich da? Wer? Das sind von deinem Bruder, von Fritz, der Junge. Und dann hat er sie so angeschaut und hat gesagt, das muss ich sofort der Mutter sagen. Und die Mutter war ja schon lange gestorben.
For 9 months, I've been waiting for a letter or a card from you, but nothing arrives. I have received letters from Vincenz and Koby. I'm now as fit as a fiddle and hope that you are all doing well too. I won't write again from now on. Why should I write if I don't get an answer?
It was an adventure, you know, it's just, you know, and I always thought that he probably was going to strike it rich and go back and help everybody, or who knows, you know. But the other theory is that during the war, the mail, during World War II, they lost contact because the mail didn't go through. And then by the time it was over, years had passed. But I don't know why he never went back or never wrote to them. I just don't understand it.
Why didn't he tell my mom, Aunt Mary, and Uncle Jack about his family more than they told him? You know, I mean, we knew he was Swiss, and he was very proud of being Swiss.
You know, we never had him. We never knew grandparents or aunts or uncles and just our 5 in our family. That was all I remember.
What I think was it hurt all of us to not have a definite family history. I mean, we were less rich because of that. It hurt us to not have, you know, like you have, you can see, you know all your relatives, you know your family history. And it was like there was always something missing.
Why couldn't we have all gotten together like a family reunion? I was disappointed and sad about that. There's something wrong with that. They were there, and I heard that my grandmother passed away, I think, in the 50s. You know, why couldn't I have met my grandmother?
You know, it's like someone that's adopted that doesn't know. I mean, none of us were adopted. We knew our parents were, but we didn't know any further back. And it's unsettling, it's uncomfortable. It wasn't uncomfortable for my grandfather because he knew everything. I don't think he realized how hard that was on Uncle Jack, to not know and to not have. You know, it makes you lonely. You feel lonely.
I think it was hard on my mom not having any relatives. There wasn't any. My mom really needed a grandmother. I think that she needed people that made her feel confident.
But that's not something I would do. You know, you would not go to another country and then at some point just quit writing to your family. It's just very strange to me. I don't understand that.
In an article about him, which appeared shortly after his death, it says, Koby came through disasters alive, which would have killed any ordinary man, according to stories told by those who knew him. He had the most marvelous physique of anyone I've ever known, said Charlie Skews about Koby. Many think he was the best woodsman and mountaineer these parts ever had. He had a way with animals, things in the woods, bear, deer. He seemed to understand them. He was a very likable fellow, but sometimes quite careless in taking care of himself. As years went on, he guided in southeastern Alaska and elsewhere, made the first crossing of the Mendenhall Glacier with Father Hubbard, and was a veteran of many ice cap and mountain range explorations. When he fell ill recently, according to Baker, the doctors remarked at his barrel chest, evidence of a strong man. Koby was the kind of man Alaska can claim as uniquely its own.